Thank you, Caroline, for your presentation. Thank you, Rick, for your introduction. Good morning, everybody. Chingley and Rick and I, for the past number of months, have had a Zoom meeting almost once a week toward planning this event. And it was several months ago that I asked the two of them, what's the best kind of contribution that I could make to this conference? What should I talk about? And we talked about several possibilities. One that I thought might be kind of fun, but I noticed both Rick and Chingley were a little cool about it. When Claudine Gay was run out of her job at Harvard, it brought to mind that 20 years ago, I wrote commentary on the mobbing of Lawrence Summers when he was run out of his job as president of Harvard. And I was thinking, why shouldn't I make a comparison of these two mobbing cases? Because in both of them were clearly, by standard indicators, they were mobbed out of their jobs. And especially interesting because the campaign against Summers came from the left and mainly, and the campaign against Claudine Gay came from the right mainly. So I thought that would be kind of nice. But then I thought, no, that's provocative and it'll annoy somebody, and so I should just kind of be a little more, less specific or less timely. And that was before Herb Richardson said, yeah, Biden has been mobbed out of his job. So anyway, so then I thought, okay, what I should do, since I've been doing research on mobbing for a long time, I should present a list of the 20 most interesting research findings, or the 20 best ideas that I've come across. And I was stumbling around trying to think of a title for the paper, and then Rick said, why don't you say top 20 takeaways? And I thought, whoa, that's alliterative, kind of a punchy title. So that's how I got to the top 20 takeaways, which is the title of my presentation here this morning. And so I did not make make PowerPoint slides. I never know what's the best way to do, and I figured let me instead just have a handout. And so you have a handout with these top 20 takeaways, a list of them, and the people who are tuned in virtually, you can go to my website. It's easy. If you just Google my name, you find my website. And there I have uploaded this paper just a couple of days ago to my website, so you can see the list of 20 takeaways there. I don't have time to talk about each one at length, but I can just kind of list them, and you can glance through. You don't have to listen to me. You can glance through the paper and figure out which one do you find most objectionable or disagreeable, incorrect, and then we can talk about it afterwards. So, that word takeaway, as you know, is in England, a takeaway is what you call takeout in the United States, right? So the basic takeaway, it'd be like the brown bag that all the other takeaways fit into, is the name itself. The emails that I've gotten over the past 25 years, the single thing people have thanked me for most is acquainting them with a word to put on their experience. Secondly, the distinction from bullying. And Chingley, I thought I was really impressed with your paper yesterday on that distinction. I've tried to make that same kind of distinction or clarification. And there's a little test online that I have where you can see what interests you more. But there's a different culture I have found among those researchers who focus on mobbing from those researchers who focus on bullying. There's different connotations of the word, different meanings. Third, and this came up yesterday eve in our discussion. Third important takeaway in terms of basic scientific foundation of this subfield: facts and evidence, not feelings. You can't build a science out of your hunches or impressions. You've got to look at evidence, so that when, as I have encountered very many mobbing targets, and somebody will say, well, do you believe me? Well, it's not a question of whether I believe you or not. It's a question of what do the data show? What's the evidence? And so that, for instance, when I've accepted, usually with ultimate regret, assignments as expert witness, first thing you got to do is look at all the evidence from all points of view. You can't simply look at the evidence from one side of the case. There's always the other side. It's the principle of let the other side be heard in law.
Yeah.
And that's a building block of social science for sure. Incidentally, Chingley's paper yesterday, and very many papers, have been exceedingly well documented with lots and lots of references. These are not references. I put in just a link or two for each of these takeaways, where you can find more references if you are looking for them. What do you say, a bone to pick I have with Heinz Lehmann and with quite a few other people with respect to definition is number 4 takeaway. To me, it's exceedingly important to keep outcomes separate from definition.
What do you mean?
That is to say, Heinz Lehmann, being a psychologist and being interested in helping people, tended to build in psychological trauma, PTSD, into his definition of what mobbing is about. And that is often the case. That's one possible outcome of mobbing, that the person suffers PTSD. But it's not the only one. And I think particularly of a case that I studied in detail, a mathematician who was a Buddhist, he almost didn't know he'd been mobbed. He was so much in his own space of Buddhism, it honestly didn't hurt him at all, you know? He wasn't much affected by it. It was like his wife had to remind him, hey, you just lost your job.
Yes.
Fifth takeaway, ambiguity and nuance. There are, and Herb Richardson has encouraged me strongly to come up with a list of archetypes. You know, the cases of mobbing that I have studied that are the clearest examples of the phenomenon. And I think that's a good idea. And I guess I would like to do that. But the fact is, in this area of science, as in any area of science, most cases are not clear-cut. There's always fuzzy edges. And so that's why I think it's really important in any analysis of a mobbing case, you don't try to score it and say, you know, this is on a scale of 100, this is 54 or 72. Maybe you can do that. But what Carolyn Crawford said that she used to be an English teacher, right? We should use our skills with language to write descriptions of mobbing cases that are accurate and that recognize the ambiguity in any case, and that we try our best to capture the complexity of the case. Number 6, I struggled and struggled how to phrase this, and I still don't know how to phrase it. Individualism. Civilizations vary, cultures vary, individuals vary in how high a value is placed on the collective, on the group, versus the individual. Western civilization tends to place a high priority on the individual. If you don't have some kind of a priority on the individual, you don't even notice mobbing. You figure that's just the way it goes, right? Because the reality is the group, the collective. And if we sacrifice this person over here to the collective or that person over there, I mean, you know, tough, that's just life. But if you have a value on the individual, and that individual then gets sacrificed or scapegoated, you say, well, why'd that happen, right? Would there be a way of preventing that from happening? And if you have a priority on the individual, and you see a bunch of people surrendering their individualities to the group, to the crowd, you say, well, there's something problematic about that too. They're sacrificing their humanity, their own personal moral autonomy to an abstract collective force. The reference there, above all, and I really recommend, if you don't know the man's work, René Girard, who died some years ago, he was a French historian, taught at Stanford in California. To my mind, he wrote the definitive analyses of scapegoating. And his work is not all highly accessible. Interesting thing about Girard, just found this out last week. Turns out that the Republican nominee for vice president of the United States, J.D. Vance, is a great disciple of René Girard, of all things.
Really?
Yeah, so, okay. Takeaway number 7, both nature and culture. Social sciences in our time are dominated by social constructionists, playing down the importance of genetics, nature, playing up the importance of social learning. You can learn all kinds of things with that sort of perspective. I think you understand things more fully if you say, no, what we humans do is partly due to learning, and it's partly rooted in biology. I read, you know, this commentator, British pundit named Theodore Dalrymple. He's a psychiatrist, popular pundit. Said the other day that he thinks that there's a basic instinct in people to humiliate somebody else, and I agree with him. There are innate impulses in human beings. One is to attack, another is to gang up. And for me at least, mobbing is much better understood if we recognize its rootedness in biological conditions. Takeaway number 8, interdisciplinarity. Wow, this conference sure illustrates that by people coming from all different directions to understand mobbing. 9, social contagion. The defining attribute of mobbing, in my view, the key to understanding it is social contagion. Monkey see, monkey do. Humans forming themselves into a herd or crowd, surrendering their independence of mind, mimicking as if in an echo chamber each other's vilification of a workmate. The pooling of people's judgment is often a step toward truth, as Francis Galton showed in his famous study in 1907 of 800 people guessing the weight of an ox, because they had 800 independent estimates of the weight of an ox, and it came pretty close to the actual weight. But those were 800 independent individuals. What defines mobbing is this social contagion that happens in a workplace where I chat with you and you chat with the next person, and we all decide, hey, this person over here, I like that phrase that Caroline Crawford used, be gone. That person needs to be gone, you know, just. I don't know whether you have heard that, the term that's used now sometimes, crowdsourcing. This popular book saying, you know, to come up with the best idea, have a crowd of people giving input. That ain't a crowd. Those are independent individuals. If you go to a crowd, that is people who have surrendered their individualities to the herd, all you're going to get is the madness of crowds. It's like the title of Charles McKay's classic book. Okay, research findings. I'm going to go through those really quickly. The origins, we've been a number of papers who have addressed that. We know pretty well the kind of factors that make a person more likely to be mobbed, including speaking with a foreign accent, Chingling. Envy, got that, wrote the book about that, and I was really pleased with Martin Sama's paper yesterday addressing envy and looking to classical sources for understanding envy. Takeaway of turning inward. in a healthy workplace, people's attention is focused on whatever is the purpose, excuse me, of the organization, producing something, educating students, doing research. What happens in an organization sometimes is people's attention all turns in on itself, and that's where mobbings occur. That's really a hallmark of mobbing. The point about apology is important. If you're ever mobbed, don't apologize. Don't try to get out of it by apologizing, because all that's going to happen is your apology is going to be interpreted as too little, too late, insincere, won't work, because the idea of an apology is a way of strengthening social bonds between people. We say sorry when we make a mistake or do something wrong. But when we put somebody out here as a target of collective ostracism, then if they apologize, well, then we discount that apology. That mobbing is more common in places where people have job security than where they're on at-will contracts. All pretty obvious, I think. How much time do I have, Rick? 1 minute?
2, great.
Two, all right. Postmodernism, who was it? Yesterday, Ian Pace made the point. He said, when truth is socially constructed, anything's possible. He said something to that effect. Postmodernism, old Richardson back here, way back in the 1960s, he published a book toward an American theology, in which he pointed out that if you don't believe in some kind of objective truth, it becomes a war of all against all. And that was prescient, because the postmodern revolution since the 1960s has basically put a whole bunch of stuff up for grabs so that my feelings trump everything, trump facts, evidence. And that makes mobbing much more possible. The final 2 takeaways are practical implications that I draw from research. Our human resources department at the University of Waterloo used to have, I don't know, maybe it still has, as a basic principle of human relations at the University of Waterloo, focus on the situation, issue, or behavior rather than on the person. I think that's about as good a basic principle of human resources as you can find. Because what happens in a mobbing is we don't focus on the situation or behavior or issue. We focus on the person. You know, that she's basically rotten to the core, and we got to get rid of her. Right? And not only is she rotten to the core, and we got to get rid of her, but that I'm a good person. You know, and that's why I'm allowed to judge her. Final takeaway: avoid courts and tribunals. I differ from very many researchers in this area in being suspicious of passing laws and policies to eliminate mobbing. I don't think it works normally. The cure becomes worse than the disease. I was really struck yesterday by Anne-Marie Flynn's comment that if she had it to do over again, she'd probably just quit in the first place. You know, people get into a process of arbitration, court cases, all that kind of stuff, where the process becomes the punishment in itself. Just goes on and on, draining the life out of a person. Anything to keep the conversation going and to keep things from lapsing into a court or tribunal is worth trying, in my view. So thank you very much for your attention.